And in a bid to reduce trade costs and enhance a more transparent trade-enabling environment in Nigeria, the federal government has approved the implementation of the 2022 fiscal policy measures made up of the supplementary external tariff 2022-2026 and excise duties on non-alcoholic beverages, cigarettes, as well as telecom services. To discuss these measures, we have joining us Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO, Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise. Great to have you.
Thank you, Larry.
And happy holidays.
Thank you.
It's great of you giving us your holiday on business morning. So looking at this fiscal policy measures, obviously we're at a point where, incomes are being squeezed. Firms are also feeling the pressure with, increase in input costs, at this point. And the federal government has released this fiscal measures. That was last month. What is the significance, of these measures, at this point to the Nigerian economy?
Well, thank you very much. The fiscal policy measures are very, very important. The conversation around policies and budget sometimes we lay too much emphasis on budgetary appropriation, year in, year out. Whereas these fiscal policy measures have much greater impact on the economy, particularly on investment. It has a lot of implications on the capacity to grow investments or even discourage investment, as the case may be. It has a lot of implications for job creation. It has a lot of implications for the competitiveness of businesses and their sustainability. Because fiscal policy measures has a lot to do first with the tariffs, import tariffs. And when we are faced with the kind of situation that we are faced in now, because there are quite a number of challenges, both to the individuals or households and to businesses. And to deal with these measures, it is not enough for us to have what we are having in the monetary policy space, intervention funds and all of that. It is also important that we complement these measures with our fiscal policy measures. Let me give you an example. Because of the challenges of energy costs now, the Chinese government has taken a decision to cut tariffs on coal, importation of coal, to zero. Import duty on coal is zero. They are doing that in spite of all these issues of carbon emission, decarbonization, but they realize that there's an emergency as far as energy cost is concerned. And even in US, with all the issues between US and China, there is now a conversation in the parliament on how to reduce import tariffs on some selected items that are being imported from China. Because inflation in the United States had reached a 40-year high. So all of these measures need to be put on the table when we are dealing with economic challenges. So in Nigeria, for instance, look at what inflation is look at the effect of inflation on the citizens and on businesses and on welfare. So what are we doing about using some of these fiscal policy measures to deal with these issues? For instance, look at the cost of bread. Over the last 1 year, we are talking about close to 100% increase in the cost of bread.
Bread alone.
Yes, and bread is a staple. So when you have a country that is so ravaged with poverty, that the citizens are crying about access to food.
And we know how that impacted Egypt.
Yes, they had, I mean, these things,
increase in bread
you can
prices.
use your fiscal policy. You can say, okay, for those of you who are producing flour, because the major inputs for bread production is wheat and sugar. The price of these things have gone up astronomically. Then on top of that, we have the exchange rate depreciation. So in order to cushion the effect of that, you can say, okay, for those of you who are in the flour mills production, the importation of wheat, at least for now, should be zero duty. The importation of raw sugar for those who are refining the sugar, I'm not talking about finished product now, The importation of the raw sugar should be 0%.
But is there any risk to that at all? You know, having, you know, most of these products actually have zero import duty. Is there any risk?
There's no major risk because you are dealing with an emergency. You can feel the pains of the citizens. So whatever you can do through the deployment of this policy, even if it is temporary, you do it. Customs revenue is just 8% or even less of total government revenue. And if you see the impact, the adverse impact of this changing of customs revenue on businesses, on investments, on welfare, it's huge. You cannot compare the effect to the revenue that they are generating. For every 1 million revenue that customs is generating, you can be sure of some detrimental effect to investment, to jobs, to welfare. That is probably more than 5 to 10 million naira. So we need to balance out this.
So does it mean the customs need to change focus at this point?
No, the issue is not with the customs.
No, I'm saying when it comes to revenue, you know, generation by, you know, the customs at this point, because that is also playing into, you know, what you just mentioned now.
But I agree with you, because there is too much emphasis on revenue generation by customs. And the customs, they will tell you that their own is to implement policies. They don't formulate the policies. So this appeal should be going to the fiscal authorities. You need to identify the challenges that citizens are facing in order to shape the structure of your fiscal policy. There's too much emphasis on revenue generation. I have not had any major conversation on trade facilitation. Each time there's an engagement with the customs, either in the National Assembly or the executive, it's all about generating revenue. And the process of trying to meet the so-called revenue targets, they hurt investment a lot. They create challenges for those who want to set up businesses. They create challenges for people who are already investing.
At the end of the day, the government needs revenue at this point.
The government needs revenue, but you need to compare your drive for revenue to the cost implication for the economy. You know, we should have a holistic view. If your fiscal policy is much more conducive for investment, if investors are not facing too much challenges at the point of entry, it could be challenges around their equipment. It could be challenges around their cost of, inputs, raw materials. And I can tell you they face a whole lot of challenges in this area.
So I guess the cost of governance comes into this conversation at some point.
Of course, it's also part of it. Because if you reduce all of these costs and you encourage more investment will mean that even your GDP will increase. You'll be able to create more jobs. And at the end of the day, you will make more revenue. The revenue may not be coming from customs, but it will manifest in the area of company income tax.
Talking about that,
it will manifest in the area of VAT.
I remember when they talked about in the US, you know, when Elon Musk paid a huge amount for tax, as the Tesla company. That was just one company paying that massive amount of, you know, in taxes in the US. And it'd be nice to see Nigerian companies actually, you know, achieve, you know, greater than that, more Nigerian companies, not just a few.
Of course, you know, the focus really should be on how to nurture, create an environment where you make more revenue from company tax. Company tax is a tax you pay after you have made your profit. And before you make that profit, you will have even generated a lot of employment, which is part of the things that we need critically.
All right, so,
and how do you deal with a situation, for instance, you have a country that has major challenges, for instance, with power. And the import duty on generator is almost 40%. How do you reconcile that?
What about
if you cannot generate electricity, encourage people to sort themselves out.
And that goes for other
even renewables.
Renewables too. And
there's no reason why we should be having any tax at all on renewables. Either you are talking of solar panels, you are talking about inverters, you are talking about batteries, because you are talking about energy transition.
But this import dependence still...
It's not, you see?
It still hurts us.
No, it's not a question of import dependence. you need to also build your capacity to be self-reliant. And in all of this, we need to determine, because it's a strategic thing, you need to determine what items are strategic and what items you need to liberalize in terms of tariffs. If you need items, for instance, of things that you don't produce locally, take ICT. See the impact of the digital economy globally. See the impact that the growth of digital economy can make on unemployment, the impact on the youths, the impact on innovation, the impact on productivity. So the key things that you need to enable to empower the digital economy, you don't have to put too much tariffs on them because you don't produce these things locally. So if you get them in easily at very low tariffs, a lot more youth will have access to digital technology.
And there should
a lot
also
more
be
investors.
Investment to research and development.
Exactly,
so
innovation.
We can also produce some of these things.
Produce one of these things, and before you know it, the revenue that you are policing at the border to get, you get even more, because you have created an economy that has grown significantly because of, so the importance of trade facilitation, and I keep emphasizing this. There's too much emphasis on revenue generation with the customs. And it's not the fault of the customs, I must tell you. It is the total framework of fiscal policy. I mean, if you have something that you have customs that generate just 8% or even 7% of total revenue, the impact, the adverse impact on the economy is far more than that.
All right, let's talk about the national list now.
Yes.
That's another one. It's about concessions to some, sectors. Is this a good move?
It's a good move. And it's also aligns with the point I just made. In this, what we call the supplementary legislation law, the supplementary protection list that you have, the national list is part of it. And the whole idea of the national list, which is a major component of this fiscal policy measure for 2022, is to ensure that we have very low tariffs on some critical sectors, critical inputs in some critical sectors. Things like the agro-processing, some in the health, some in manufacturing, and all of that. So these things are good because on the national list, we have tariff ranging sometimes from 0 to maximum of about 10%. And the whole idea is to strengthen domestic production capacity. Because even China, if you check their import bill, it's also running to trillions of dollars. Every country needs some imports to be able to build capacity, to invest, and capacity to even export. So it's a question of being strategic in what you allow and what you don't allow. And we should also have a clear strategy to determine the systemic impact of some of these policies.
But what's a clear strategy for a country that is heavily reliant on importation?
The clear strategy is to determine what you are good at, to determine your competitive strength, to determine what you need to bring in to strengthen your capacity. I just gave you an example of ICT. Many of the critical components we need in ICT, we don't produce it here. So when you are talking about ICT equipment, you don't begin to talk about import dependence, because you need to depend on those imports to build your capacity to grow your digital economy. I know what some investors in ICT face when they are importing some critical equipment into this country. It's a nightmare. They'll be running from pillar to post, issues of duty classification, valuation, approvals, all sorts of things. Sometimes it can be extremely frustrating. There was a case of some investors in the health sector. During the peak of COVID, they imported ventilators. By the time it got to the ports, the customs said because the ventilator has compressor, they had to attract the duty of a fridge or an air conditioner.
These are important health
yes.
facilities.
It created a whole lot of problem for that investor. And we are talking about health sector. We are talking about COVID. So all of these things are important.
So it boils down to all the red tapes, you know, being tackled.
The red tapes are very is all part of it.
Right.
The procedures and the challenges of trade facilitation around procedures with customs, around the terminal operators, around the shipping companies. All these key players in the ecosystem of international trade, we need to pay a lot more attention to them.
Right.
Because what their activities hurts the economy a great deal. It's limiting the capacity to create jobs. And we need a lot of employment. Look at all this insecurity problem. Part of the reasons we are having this is because of unemployment.
So we need to tackle.
We need to deploy these fiscal policy measures.
Quite a lot to unpack there. And obviously, you start by making a move, step by step, and eliminating, most of these red tapes that are disturbing international trade at this point. All the trade inhibitors. It is a big problem. But thank you so much, Mr. Muda Yusuf. Your recommendations, quite sound. I must say, thank you also for giving us your holiday.
Okay,
and do enjoy the rest of it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. All right, so after the break, it will be the largest consulate globally, estimated at $537 million. Talking about the construction of new consulate office in Lagos. That's our next conversation. Do stay with us. This is Business Morning.